I'm asking every Democrat, I'm asking every independent, I'm asking a lot of Republicans to come together in this campaign to support your candidacy, which I endorse.
So today, during a joint live stream, Bernie Sanders officially endorsed Joe Biden. So I'm going to play the endorsement for you, and I'm also going to discuss a little bit about why I think Bernie Sanders did this, and I'm also going to show you some reactions from around Twitter. So first, here's the clip.
We are in a terrible moment, an unprecedented moment, and I know we share the understanding that we've got to go forward right now and out of this in an unprecedented way to address the terrible pain that so many of our fellow Americans are feeling. So today I am asking all Americans, I'm asking every Democrat, I'm asking every independent, I'm asking a lot of Republicans to come together in this campaign to support your candidacy, which I endorse, to make certain that we defeat somebody who I believe, and I'm speaking just for myself now, is the most dangerous president in the modern history of this country. A president, and you made this point, who downplayed this pandemic, who ignored the advice that some of his people were giving him.
Well, Bernie, I want to thank you for that. It's a big deal, I think that your endorsement means a great deal. It means a great deal to me. I think people are going to be surprised that we are apart on some issues, but we're awfully close on a whole bunch of others. And I think you've made. If I am the nominee, which it looks like now you just made me, I'm going to need you, not just to win the campaign, but to govern.
So there it is. Now, they talked back and forth for a while. It was maybe 30 minutes long, their discussion. It was clear for most of the discussion that Joe Biden was reading off a teleprompter. Now, I got no issue with teleprompters, but when you're having a joint discussion about issues, about moving forward, about the election, do you really need to be on teleprompter? I mean, it really shows you how weak of a candidate Joe Biden is. He also attempted, Biden did, to speak to Gen Z. Reminder, about I think 2 years ago now, Joe Biden said he has no empathy for young people nowadays. So clearly he's trying to change that now. And if you haven't seen that clip of the clip I'm talking about, you will see it, I'm almost positive, in a Donald Trump ad at some point. Biden went at length about how he has no empathy for millennials, or no empathy for young people in general. So wait for that. But the reason he's doing that is because Joe Biden right now is tied with Trump with voters under 35. So when you are the Democratic nominee and you're not winning young people, it shows you how weak you are. Right now, Biden's enthusiasm is lower than Hillary Clinton's lowest point against Trump was in 2016. He has lower enthusiasm than Hillary Clinton. There is a lot that has to be done, and this single endorsement by Bernie Sanders is not going to do it. Many of Sanders supporters, I'm sure, will understand, will get the points that he's making, will agree with Bernie, and they'll vote for Joe Biden. But many others will not. And I've said this before. I think there is a legitimate argument either way. And I'm not going to shame anybody either way in terms of what you're doing. I think you can make the case either way, and that's a personal decision that you'll make yourself. They also went on to discuss these joint task forces that supporters from both of their camps are creating to move forward, not just for the campaign, but for the future, a future Biden administration. Joint task forces on the economy, education, climate change, immigration, and criminal justice. We're going to have to see what that ends up producing, what that leads to. At no point during this live stream did Joe Biden mention or even mention Medicare for all. It wasn't brought up by either Bernie or Biden. I think Bernie should have brought it up. I'm sure the reason he didn't bring it up is because Joe Biden doesn't support it. But Medicare for all has to be front and center here if Biden has any hope at all at winning some of these younger supporters. Biden did back a $15 minimum wage. Now, maybe he already supported that. I don't know. But that seems to be an issue that Democrats at large have taken on at this point already. $15 minimum wage at this point is not much. I mean, at this point, they should be fighting for a $20 minimum wage, but $15. Now, let me get to a little bit of why I think Bernie did this. So clearly, Bernie already dropped out of the race. Okay, he suspended his campaign, so he's still on the ballot in the upcoming primary states. If you're voting, if your state hasn't voted yet, make sure you vote for Bernie Sanders. They are mail-in ballots. They should be mail-in ballots now, I think, for the remaining states. So you should still be able to vote for Bernie by mail. Make sure you do that. But yeah, he suspended his campaign. Clearly, all along, Bernie Sanders said that he would support whoever the nominee is. So this shouldn't come as a surprise. Like, this endorsement isn't surprising at all. But it's still worth discussing why I think he's doing it, because a lot of people, I think, are maybe getting the wrong impression that Bernie Sanders is now backing Joe Biden's agenda. That's not what's happening here. This endorsement from Bernie Sanders is more of an anti-Trump endorsement than a pro-Biden endorsement. So I think Bernie Sanders looks at the cultural impact, the negative cultural impact that Donald Trump has on society. I mean, just to pick out a recent example, there's a million examples, but to pick out a recent example, him calling the coronavirus the Chinese virus, that has had a negative cultural impact. There is now an increase in racism against Chinese people. And I've heard stories of people's kids who are Chinese being picked on at school now because of the Chinese virus. So that's just one example of Trump's cultural impact, but also issues like ripping up the Iran deal. And now you're seeing the ongoing increasing sanctions on Iran. And the U.S. just blocked a $5 billion pandemic aid package from the IMF to Iran. So situations like this, whether you are going to vote for Biden or not, you have to at least acknowledge that this would not be happening since the Iran deal was under Barack Obama. All of this would not be happening if it were a Democratic president. So I think this is an issue where Bernie Sanders may look at Biden and see a clear difference here. Again, still more of an anti-Trump vote than a pro-Biden vote, but still a clear division in terms of what they would do. Coming out of the Paris Climate Agreement, again, something you wouldn't have seen happen. I know the Paris Climate Agreement doesn't go far enough, nowhere near, but still, you would not see a Democratic president rip that up or drop out of that the way that Trump did. So these are just several examples. I think the cultural impact is kind of the biggest one, though you could argue the Iran deal is a massive one if it ends up going somewhere where it's really going to create mass destruction. But the cultural impact is undeniable. That said, there is also the other part of it, the political aspect of this endorsement that Nomiki Konstier on Twitter, who was a Sanders surrogate and has great insights when it comes to the DNC and the Democratic Party and politics in general. She tweeted out, "Wonder why Bernie sometimes surrenders to the centrists? Remember, he has to operate in the Senate under Schumer rules. You want Bernie in leadership? He's going to be cautious to keep his existing power. While we think movement first, he's probably conditioned to think Senate first." So when it comes to Bernie's position and weight within the party, he has more power if he plays this ball. Now, to be fair to, I don't know, the party or Bernie or however you want to view this, Bernie's still able to challenge the Democratic Party publicly, rhetorically, challenge the media, challenge leadership. So he still does that. But when it comes down to it, when it comes down to a moment like this, where it's going to be him either endorsing Joe Biden or him being blamed for Donald Trump, if Donald Trump wins, he's going to back Joe Biden, and understanding as well, of course, his power in leadership. Now, let me show you, before I even go on to some of the other reactions from Twitter, let me just mention, I've mentioned this before, but I think it's worth mentioning again here. I don't think the Democratic Party really cares either way in terms of if Biden wins. Now, let me tell you what I mean by that. The Democratic Party, as in the leadership, the consultants, and the corporate donors. The big fight for them was Bernie Sanders. Because as long as they control, as long as they maintain power of the Democratic Party, again, the consultant class, the current Democratic leadership, and the corporate donors, then they're happy. They have jobs, they have power, they're good. But if they are to capitulate to the left wing of the party, if they are to give in to Sanders on his policies and his base and working class voters in general, then they lose power. Corporate donors would lose power, the current consultants lose power, and Democratic leadership would be gone. So, yes, of course, I think they would prefer Biden win, obviously, but they would rather lose to Trump than lose to Bernie. Because if they lost to Bernie, then they would lose their power. If they lose to Trump, they still maintain power over the Democratic Party. Now, let me give you some reactions, other reactions from Twitter. Jeff here, Jeff Miami, tweets out, I feel bad for Bernie. He has to do this or every dumb centrist on earth will blame him for Trump for eternity. Which, as Rocky Owen says here, they're going to blame him either way. Rocky Owen's below here. So I agree with both of these tweets. If Biden loses, which is still very likely, then they're going to blame, if not Bernie, then they'll blame his supporters. Because at this point, Bernie came out earlier than he came out for Hillary Clinton to endorse the Democratic nominee. They're going to have a tough time blaming him for the loss, but they absolutely will blame Sanders supporters, will blame progressive voters, 100%. Even though the entire time we have been warning you, warning the Democratic Party, warning everybody that Joe Biden is a horrible candidate because of his past record, because of some recent allegations that have come up against him, because of his lack of mental acuity. Biden is a horrible candidate. So if he loses, it's on Joe Biden, which is also why it's on Joe Biden to reach these younger voters to be able to win. Now, I've said before, there may be enough anti-Trump voters for Joe Biden to win. There might be. This is a weird election. Usually enthusiasm predicts who's going to win the election. Biden's enthusiasm right now is much lower than Trump's, but that doesn't mean people aren't going to come out and basically vote against Trump by voting for Joe Biden. So Biden can still win this thing. I think right now it's a toss-up. It's 50-50. It can go either way. But why take that risk? Joe Biden should be chasing after Sanders supporters, working class voters in general, people that are out of a job now. You have, 16 million, at least 16 million newly unemployed people in the U.S. Many millions of those people no longer have health insurance that they had tied to their employer. How are you still not fighting for Medicare for all? And that's just one example. So if Biden were to actually come out strong for an issue like Medicare for all, just say he changed his mind, bring on people onto his campaign that actually fought for Medicare for all, so people would maybe believe him in his newly changed opinion on Medicare for all, then he'd be able to get a lot of those voters over. But I don't see him doing that because who controls his campaign? Corporate interests, big pharma, the health insurance industry. They're not going to capitulate on Medicare for all, so he's not going to. More reactions here. Brianna Joy Gray, this is Bernie's former national press secretary, saying with the utmost respect for Bernie Sanders, who is an incredible human being and a genuine inspiration, I don't endorse Joe Biden. I supported Bernie Sanders because he backed ideas like Medicare for all, canceling all student debt, and a wealth tax. Biden supports none of those. This is a great point. For the Bernie supporters, it's about the policies. It's about the platform. So if Joe Biden isn't going to adopt the Sanders platform, then he can't expect to win the voters over. Now, you may be thinking at home, well, but since Joe Biden's the nominee, it's got to be his policies, right? Is that why people voted for Joe Biden in the primary? If you're a Joe Biden voter or you're sitting next to one, ask them right now. Name 3 Joe Biden policies. 3, just 3. Do you even know what he fought for? Joe Biden did not win because of policy. He won because of media misinformation on electability and because of name recognition as Barack Obama's vice president. That's why Joe Biden secured the nomination, not because of policy. So Joe Biden could take on the entire Bernie Sanders platform and not lose a single average Joe Biden voter. Now, I say average Joe Biden voter because there are, of course, the people I was talking about, the consultants, the corporate interests, Democratic leadership that support Joe Biden because of the policies, because he's not going to push for issues or policies like Medicare for all. But the vast majority of the Joe Biden base don't care. They just want to see Trump out. So if Joe Biden adopted the Bernie Sanders platform, he would not lose a single average Joe Biden voter. Moving on. No Mickey Const, again, with an opinion here. If the Biden team wants to build this centrist/left coalition to beat Trump, maybe tell your surrogates to stop harassing and kicking at Bernie folks right now. This website is pretty toxic at this moment. Yeah. This is something that is obvious to me as somebody who is on Twitter a lot. Now, to be fair, a lot of voters aren't on Twitter. They don't see this, but they may watch cable news and still see cable news attacking the progressive base. It is so hilarious to me how much these same centrist voters, these Joe Biden supporters in the media, how much they fawn over the centrist voters or the moderate voters or conservative voters. Oh, how do we win over conservatives? How do we get these moderates that don't even exist? But again, this idea of moderates, that they're between both parties, not a real thing. There is 40% of the country that doesn't normally vote. Those are the people that you should be chasing after. Those are the people that are disillusioned by this two-party system, by two parties representing corporate interests. A majority or a plurality of Americans now self-identify as independent and not Democrat or Republican, and it's been that way for years. The way Joe Biden would actually win, the way that his team would be able to win is by reaching out to the left-wing voters. But the media is not going to do that because, again, it's antithetical to corporate media. They have wealth and power based on the current system. Why are they going to fight for anything different? Holly Otterbein of Politico tweets out, Justice Democrats' Waleed Shahid says, quote, the announcement of joint Sanders-Biden task forces is a good step forward and is aligned with key parts of the hashtag Earn Our Vote letter sent out by progressive millennial and youth organizations. We're waiting on the details. So I covered this briefly, I think during my live stream. Basically, there is a bunch of groups, Justice Democrats, March for Our Lives, Sunrise Movement, and others came together to write this joint letter to basically put pressure on Joe Biden and say, hey, if you take on these progressive, these left-wing personnel that we suggest here in our letter, and you also support big policies like a Green New Deal, then you'll be able to earn our endorsement, including about $100 million in support from those various groups in terms of the activism that they would be engaged in on the ground. So right now it seems that, at least from Waleed Shahid here, he likes the direction that this is going in terms of what Biden has been saying or what he said during that live stream. Again, trying to reach out to Gen Z, even mentioning "not me, us" at the end of the stream. How that's a great Bernie Sanders slogan, and he likes that. So but it's all rhetoric, right? It's all rhetoric. Now the joint task force that are mentioned here, the joint task forces is substantial, or at the very least it is substantive. So there is something there. There are actually going to be people from both camps working together to work on policy. But what will actually come out of that? Is it going to be like the Unity Reform Commission, where it's still a majority of, in that case, Hillary backers and Tom Perez or Barack Obama backers compared to Bernie Sanders backers, so they're outnumbered? Or is it going to be an actual joint, meaning equal, Sanders and Biden backers working on policy? Even though we know the policy answers, it's the Bernie Sanders platform. It's a $16 trillion Green New Deal. It's Medicare for all. It's free public college. Go on and on and on and on. So that's what the policy should be. There should need to be a joint task force. We know the Biden platform is created by special interests. So why are we even, having discussions with that? It doesn't make any sense. The Bernie Sanders platform is actually for the people. One more reaction here. John Ederola tweets out, Bernie Sanders endorsed Joe Biden in April, and he could do 100 events for him between now and November, and that wouldn't stop centrists from blaming Bernie and his supporters if Joe loses to Trump. Yeah, this actually goes in line with what a different tweet I showed earlier. But yeah, this also is, it's important to mention. Don't just base your vote on what people are going to say about you. I think you should look at all of this with a clear head, as I'm trying to do here. I'm trying to look at this objectively. I think there are legitimate arguments to make for why you should vote for Biden. I also think there are legitimate arguments to make to not vote for him. I've heard both. Both are strong arguments. So do what you want. Do what feels right to you. But I will say, at the very least, still go out and vote down ballot for Democrats. I think it's important that you don't have Republicans in control. Even if the difference is just on social issues, cultural issues, fine. But there is a difference there. You don't want Republicans in control of Congress. So make sure you go out and vote for the Democratic members on down ballot. So, look, ultimately, this Bernie Sanders endorsement was clearly going to come at some point. I think it was rolled out in a way that, I don't know, it's all of it's very, very predictable, in my opinion. Bernie already dropped out. He was going to endorse Biden. It makes sense for him to endorse him now and be able to. It appears like he's getting some concessions in the case of these joint task forces. But again, what actual role will those play? Who knows? A lot of this is still up in the air in terms of what kind of impact these progressive voters, these Bernie Sanders supporters, will have on the Biden campaign. So this is just the beginning. We'll keep an eye on this, and hopefully Biden continues to understand the importance of reaching out to voters under 45.